name is Alyssa.
And I'm Tony.
And we are the Sultry Sisters. We're a community-based organization that empowers women to live healthy and creative lives in North County, San Diego, and recently, DC.
We curate events, workshops, mixers, and meetups centered around women's arts, wellness, and sisterhood.
Our mission is to empower women to live vibrant and shine bright through creative expression and conscious holistic living.
Our vision is to create a safe space that provides women the arts and wellness resources that are affordable and accessible.
So far, we've partnered with Dancing Soul Boutique, Village Rock Shop, Carlsbad Village Yoga Co-op, and nonprofit organization Leap to Success. To find out more information about us and to sign up for our future events, visit SoultrySisters.com.
You can also find us on social media on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Sultry Sisters.
We hope to see you soon.
Hey, hey. Welcome back. A new month, a new book club.
Yes. So welcome back, everyone. Happy Sunday. So we're doing our Sultry Hangout on Sundays. So if you're an OG, you might remember that we used to do our Sultry Hangouts every Sunday starting in 2020. And so we had shifted them around based on our schedules. So we're on a Sunday schedule for the month of April. So welcome back. So yeah, comment below where you're tuning in from, what you're sipping on, and what's going on with y'all.
I guess I'll start. I'm tuning in from San Diego, and I am sipping on some iced coffee in a wine glass. Why? Because your girl's feeling fancy. Yes, I need a little energy. I need a little pick me up to get me through the last half of the day. So I'm drinking a little iced coffee.
Nice. Everyone, I'm Tony. I'm tuning in from the DC area, so East Coast. I'm back on the East Coast now. And I'm sipping on some Tulsi hibiscus and what is the other one? Echinacea tea.
Oh yeah, that mix.
So I've been sipping on this in this mug that gives me spring vibes. Since it's spring now, I'm wearing this thrifted like kimono shawl thing with like embroidery on it that I got from Goodwill when I was in California. I'm wearing some earrings that I feel like are bringing in the Afro-minimalism vibe, which I got from a local Black artisan in Brooklyn, New York, when Alyssa and I were together there. So welcome back, y'all.
Yes, keeping it Afrocentric, I'm wearing my Ma'at sweater.
Yes, from Afro Yoga by Angie. I just got the black and gold one. So I'm excited. So now we can match. And it's so soft. It's like really nice.
Yeah, and like just recently someone was like, "Oh, my aunt, the goddess." I was like, "Yes, someone knows." Yeah, so it was cool to like have someone recognize, because usually people just like don't, say anything because it is kind of like a muted color. But yeah, it's kind of cool. If you know, it's one of those if you know type things.
Right? Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, I have the t-shirt too that has all the principles on the back, so I feel like people can more so recognize it when I wear the t-shirt, which is nice. And I was gonna say today's been a sultry Sunday, so we had our Soul Flow yoga class this morning. I led us in a yoga flow and did some like oracle deck readings with my Earthcraft deck, and then we did a nice restorative flow. And now we're here for our sultry hangout. So it's a very sultry Sunday.
It's a sultry Sunday for sure. We got Kyle Moore checking in from Wheaton, Maryland with some Earl Grey Supreme tea. Yes.
Nice.
Thanks for joining us. Happy to have you back for our book club.
Your tea sounds like a premium tea. That sounds nice.
Supreme. So if you're just tuning in, this is our book club series where we are reading the Afro-Minimalist Guide to Living with Less. If you want to learn more, you can go to SoultrySisters.com/book club. We will post like the book that we are reading, and we usually give also a sneak peek of the next book that we're reading. So be sure to follow us on all social media and join our newsletter because you'll be the first to know what's up next.
Yeah, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Sultry Sisters. So if you subscribe, you'll get an alert when we go live. So we'll be going live every Sunday, same time, same place for the month of April. And of course, speaking of April, so April is Earth Month. So Earth Day is on the 22nd. And so our theme of course, is SOULstainability. And so every year since we started, we've always done different programming on, how to, be better stewards of the earth, how to connect with Mama Earth and all that good stuff. So this year, of course, we wanted to highlight this book. And just like a quick intro, so like Christine Platt is a writer based in the DMV area, so the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, a Black woman, of course. And so I've been following her for a few years now. And then she wrote her book. And then I read it last year. And so so it was in 2021 that it came out, and I wanted to support her because I had known her and her journey. But through reading the book, I was like, oh, like I think our community would really benefit from this, because we talk about sustainability, we talk about food sovereignty, we talk about conscious living. And so I thought this would be a great book, and especially since it's written by a Black woman, right? Because a lot of times when we talk about sustainability, there's a lot of greenwashing in mainstream society, and of course like colonialism, imperialism, and white supremacy dominates the sustainability conversations oftentimes. So we thought it would be great too to feature a book written by a Black woman to talk about this topic.
Exactly. And I first came to know Christine Platt from TED Talks, y'all. Like she had a TED Talk 3 years ago talking about Afro-minimalism. And then, Tony and I became aware of her book release. Tony was the first to read the book. So it's kind of like the way we curate things is like divine timing. We kind of let things fall and align. And also a fun fact, our first SOULstainability event in San Diego, we did a book swap.
Yeah.
So how beautiful, a couple years later, we are now doing a book club. So whether we are swapping books or reading books about living with less and practicing Afro-minimalism, we just find different ways to talk about SOULstainability. So let us know in the comments after learning the definition of SOULstainability, how you relate to living a sustainable life. Are you more of like a thrifter? Do you like to participate in swaps? Are you, aware of Afro-minimalism or minimalism? Let us know in the chat. And as we like to start all of our conversations, we want to ask you a question to kind of prime our minds and get us ready for reading this book. And what does minimalism mean to you? So when you heard that word, what comes to mind? When did you first hear about it? Let us know in the chat and we'll start to discuss.
Yeah, I feel like when I first heard of minimalism, I want to say it's with those two guys, the minimalists or whatever. Because you had shown me their documentary back maybe 2017, maybe.
Yes, it was back then.
Yeah, and so I started watching YouTube videos and finding a bunch of YouTubers talking about minimizing their lifestyle and all that stuff. But I do feel like it was like white people or at least not Black people that I saw.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was interesting. But anyways, I'll just answer the question first and then but minimalism to me now means like being intentional with what I have, and I guess living with less, but I don't want to say because that's like her tagline. But essentially just like being intentional with what I have, and also like the soul sustainability part. So like mind, body, spirit as well. So like decluttering my mind, making sure like my body also has like less, like, so, now I eat plant-based. So putting less things, less harmful things in my body, and then spirit, right? So like letting go of all of that to just be one with self. So I feel like now it's more evolved to like a holistic definition of what minimalism means to me.
Yeah, for me, I first became aware more so of minimalism through the minimalist. I even went to a meetup with them at the House of Blues in San Diego. Like I was like, oh my gosh, I was so impacted by it, because at the time I learned about minimalism was a time I was also quitting my full-time job teaching. and like really trying to live an intentional life, like taking a new path. And with that, I had to be creative with how I spent my money. Like I wasn't making as much money as I, did prior. So I do relate with Christine in this book when she talks about like
Mm-hmm.
the different reasons why people choose minimalism. And so for me, like minimalism for me means that I have more choices. Like
Mm-hmm.
minimalism means more intention so that I can really live the life that I want to live. To me, minimalism means creativity, like being
Mm-hmm.
creative with the ways I use what I have. So yeah, that's kind of how I came to minimalism, is really redefining how I wanted to live my life and
Mm-hmm.
not just be so wrapped up into buying things because I was so busy. I just really relate to her origin story. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like similarly, it was like in a place of like me thinking about like what I was acquiring. So it's more so yeah, physical like things, tangible things when I first started. So Kyle shares, for me, it's about rejecting overconsumption, which is the normal way of being in our age, making an
mhm,
effort to live without the need to buy and do more things. And I really like the part, Kyle, that you mentioned, buy and do more things, right? Because I think there's also the mindset of it, of like, especially people of color, Black folks, like having to do, go, go, go. And it's also helpful to just do less. Like less is more, truly, which I think is essentially the the overarching theme of
mhm.
less is more.
And so, as we start to go through this book, and a question we want to invite for y'all to think about your answer is, how can we intentionally live with less in our daily lives? That's like the question we're going to be asking ourselves and reflecting on as we work through this book, y'all. So, you don't have to have the answers now, but if you have a journal nearby or you're driving, just take this question in, and we're going to be revisiting these questions throughout our journey through the book.
Yeah, so with the book, so it kind of goes into first, I'll just read out loud. So like like welcoming us to the journey
Hmm.
about Christine, the author, the Afro minimalist. And then it goes into part one, the principles, which we're talking about this week.
Hmm.
So the principle starts off as like why this is important, right? Um, and so the first thing that I wanted to share is less as liberation. And so in the book, she shares the principles and practices of living with less are pathways to liberation, right? So throughout the book, throughout this month of us, reflecting and discussing the book, we'll have different takeaways on like how just this way of life then puts us towards
Hmm.
liberation as a collective, right? Um, and then another quote I wanted to share is, this journey liberates you to transform not only your home, but your mindset as you choose to live with intention. So I
Mm,
think that's important too when she's talking about the mindset, which I feel like the other minimalists that I have found years ago didn't necessarily always talk about the mindset aspect
right.
of it. So I appreciate her talking about that as a pathway to liberation, especially because in January when we read Rest as Resistance, we talked a lot about, what liberation looks like for our collective, for us as a community. And I thought this is great in April for us to talk about living with less as a pathway to that liberation that we discussed in January.
Exactly. So just like this book is broken up into like three different sections, I also think about like the first part of the year for Soul Tree and our book club as like these three sections, like, rest as liberation, love as liberation, and now we're thinking about living with less and minimalism as liberation. And these are all three different Black female writers and authors. And
Hmm.
so what I want to like ground us in, and the intentionality is that we are choosing to like revisit these concepts through our Afrocentric lens, through our lens, our cultural lens. And that's also what I appreciate about this book. There are parts where she has for the culture, So if
Mhm.
you do have, we're not going to go into detail of all these sections, but do get this book. And what I do appreciate is that she does give us context for um, be like our culture as Black people, like why we might have, certain attachments to, you know, to things, and like why we may be where we are right now. So I just appreciated the context that this book offers compared to the other minimalism books and resources that I've gone through. So that's something to look forward to, y'all. Just a little overview of what
Yeah.
we're going to be getting into.
Yeah, and that's why also, yeah, we did want to share like I guess a disclaimer is that this book club will be a little bit different. We're not necessarily going through page by page, kind of quote by quote, what the author is saying. It's more of like a communal discussion. So we're going to bring up topics and themes from the different sections, and then some quotes and passages that resonated with us. But there's so much detail that she mentions in the book. So definitely get your hand on the physical copy or the audiobook, or go to your local library and check it out, because there's so much detail that we just could not fit
Hmm.
in our book club for this month. But it does help get into the context of how Black folks and the African diaspora, how minimalism kind of is a way to that liberation through cultural context. So, anyways, that's a disclaimer we wanted to share.
And so, with that said, let's talk a little bit about Afro minimalism. So, we have a quote to share. Afro minimalism is a style of minimalism that is authentic and aligned with my passion and purpose. That's what Christine shares. And I really appreciate that, how minimalism is an expansive term when it comes to
Mhm.
minimalism, because it includes the self, not just about the things.
Mhm. Yeah, I appreciate how Afro minimalism um talks about like the authenticity, right? Like that's throughout the whole book. So we'll keep coming back to this, but being authentic, right, to ourselves. Um so to not strip away our culture, to not strip away our personal identities, to not strip away our personalities, right? Because when we watch these other documentaries, it's just like this all white space, like the color wise, like white or beige, like home decor, like they wouldn't have any of this stuff that's in either of our backgrounds. They like traditional minimalists would like freak out. They'd be like, oh my God, there's too much going on. And that's what Christine is saying, that in her journey, she was like, this didn't resonate with me. She was like, I don't feel joy in my home. I don't feel like myself. So that's what I appreciate about Afro minimalism, is that it really is about the individual finding what this means for yourself.
I really appreciated too in the beginning. She was like, all right, we're not going to start with like, a full step guide of how to get rid of stuff. Like this is about the
Mhm,
principles, and the first part is like self-discovery. So we're going to look
mhm,
inward before we do any type of action. And for me as a person who like
mhm,
has revisited minimalism in different phases of my life since I learned about minimalism, I kind of that was a thing that hit different. I was like, oh wow, you don't want me to
mhm.
like start throwing stuff out. You're like, no, we're gonna pause
Yeah.
for a second and we're gonna like get to the root. And I really appreciated like the I don't know, the guidance of we're gonna really look into inward
Mhm,
before we even start, because otherwise it just repeats. And that's what happened to me. Like
mhm,
I have gotten rid of a lot of things, and then all of a sudden 6 8 months later I'm like, why is my closet full again? Why is that drawer full again? And she talks about that, and I'm like, and so I have this hope now after reading the first, like the principles, that if I really take the time to pause and dig deep into these rooted reasons why I might tend to accumulate certain things, that I'll be able to continue with a lifelong journey of minimalism versus having it
mhm.
be a phase. Think about like, these different like diet cultures or things like that. I really want this to be a lifestyle. And I really feel like she is guiding me to that, because she's starting with principles and really asking us to personally reflect.
Yeah, exactly. I resonate with that 1000%. And exactly, I feel like Christine talks about minimalism as a lifestyle, like you just mentioned, not a trend, right? Because I feel like sometimes on Instagram or YouTube or Pinterest, when you see all these folks, it does look more trendy, right? Like, oh, like look at that. Look at how everything's just so clean looking. But she's like, no, is this practical? Like, are you going to sustain it? Right. When we think of soul sustainability, are these things that are going to sustain your mind, body, spirit, soul, and community? So I think those are things that also Afro minimalism talks about. She doesn't necessarily have that in this definition, but I think it really does speak to the holistic well-being of the folks who are practicing. And then another thing I want to point out is on page 29 on the bottom, she talks about minimalism also empowered me to embrace a radical reimagining of home as a sanctuary, a
Mhm.
place to unplug, rest, recharge, recenter, and recommit to my priorities and purpose, right? So, and like she mentions, there's a recommit and a
Mhm.
recentering. So it's a journey, it's a practice, it's an iterative process, right? It's not just one time you're going to clean out all your stuff. You're going to be like, I'm a minimalist, and that's done. And I also appreciate how she mentioned sanctuary, because sultry, of course, we talk about sanctuary all the time. Fun fact, that's also going to be the theme of this year's festival in July. But sanctuary is really important to us when we talk about wellness, when we talk about well-being, when we talk about this journey to healing, right? And so I appreciate that she mentioned sanctuary, because I feel like
Mhm.
sometimes the mainstream minimalism looks at your home as more so like a cookie cutter thing of like it should just look like a square outline. But she's like, no, you can have flowers here, you can have rough edges here, you can add sparkle, razzle dazzle, all these things, which that was really empowering when I had learned about her journey, was that it was just so different than the other principles that they teach
Well,
you in the mainstream one.
I feel like, you know, it's coming off what I got from that quote, Tony, is your sanctuary, your space is supposed to like rejuvenate you. So you should have things around you that not necessarily like she also mentioned, like, not just Mary Kondo spark joy, but really like
Mhm.
nurture you. So
Mhm.
it's not going to be an aesthetic that looks the same for everyone. So it does require us
Mhm.
to be more mindful of like, okay, is this that's why like our rooms look different, like
Mhm.
because we thrive and we get energy from different things. So
Mhm. Yes, I think
and
it's so
so
important.
exactly. And so with talking about minimalism, she shares this definition of minimalism is a lifestyle trend that encourages simplicity and minimizing excess to ensure life is filled with only what matters. Exactly. Like,
Mhm.
so our sanctuary is filled only with the things that we need. So I love reading books. So I tend to have more books than maybe other people. Like, but it's just like having a place for all your things. I think she talked about that too. It's not
Mhm.
necessarily like that you don't have a lot of things. It's like, no, everything has a place
Mhm.
because it's purposeful. And I really appreciated that because that gave me a different lens. Because sometimes I get anxious, like, I have too many things. It's like, do you have too many things or do you want to think about making sure you have a place for all the things that you have? And that
Yeah.
to me is coming from a place of more that I can do that. Like I'm like, okay,
Mhm.
if it doesn't have a place, maybe it doesn't have a place, right?
Yeah.
That's different than I need to get rid of it because I shouldn't have it.
Mhm.
That feels like a punishment versus I think this would be better served with someone else, maybe.
Yeah. Which she'll talk about later in the book. And also I think with that process too is also thinking of where is its home in your home, right? Like does this thing item have a place in a home, but also like does it also serve other things? Because she'll mention this later too, but also not everything has to be like utilitarian. Like she's like, it doesn't have to be like you have one book, one scarf, one thing. It's like some things could be like, oh, like this wall here is my self-portrait wall because it inspires me of all the different facets of myself, right? Then I have these plants. I have a bunch of plants. Like, right, someone might feel fine with one plant, but all these plants bring me like mental, emotional joy and helps my well-being. So she also will talk about that later about how it's not necessarily the number of stuff, but it's
Yes.
the intention behind it. That's what I was trying to say. So yeah, we'll get to that in a little bit, but um, another definition of minimalism that she talks about is that it's a practice, right? It's a mindset, a choice, a lifestyle. So much more than an aesthetic, which is what we keep on iterating. But if you're reading the book, you'll see again, it's like that repetition. Like we mentioned when we were reading Rest is Resistance, I think repetition for the Afro minimalist is important too. So we can reprogram and unlearn in our head that like it's okay that it's a practice. It's okay if we're not getting it right the first time. It's a journey. We're going to have to recommit, recenter over and over again. It's not one and done. It is a lifelong process, I'm sure.
And I like what Kyle's sharing too in the chat. I think this conversation kind of speaks to an important difference between aesthetic wellness and genuine wellness that's difficult to parse just from social media. The look is easy to cling to. Say that again. Yes.
And then he finishes. Sorry, he finishes. The look is easy to cling to rather than the habits and the mindset. Yes. So continue. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I resonate with that. And I feel like that's why, this conversation, like Tony and I want to bring to our community, because it can be like feel not as accessible when minimalism is showcased as like aesthetic wellness. When you see like, get ready with me, like what I eat in a day, all these things that's like wellness, but it's like, I don't know, like for me, it's like being well is like just live your life. Like you don't have to, there's no receipts that are needed for you to show that you are well. And so that genuine, wellness sometimes is difficult to see who's really being well, because sometimes it's depicted as like, well, did you post that you're well? Does your thing look like that? So I agree with you, and that's why we want to have this conversation, because we want people to feel affirmed through discussion that it's not just all clean, like conversations, discussions. We're gonna get a little bit messy with like, bringing up what minimalism means to us in our journey. And so we're just welcoming that conversation here. We haven't figured it out, y'all.
Yeah. And also when we talk about like aesthetic versus genuine wellness, also I think then the word superficial comes up for me too, right? So I feel like the aesthetic one is also the superficial one, right? Like what looks cute, trendy. And then also like, yeah, someone could have one room in their house that looks the like aesthetic minimalism, and they probably have a closet or a storage unit filled to the top with all this excess things, right? So it's also like just in general with the social media age now, it's like it is really challenging to see these things on social media, because then sometimes we like self criticize ourselves
Well, I mean,
of like, oh, well, this person looks like this. Like we never know what their house actually
I
looks
mean,
like.
and this is where we're going to get into this next topic of conscious consumerism. So we've talked so far about minimalism, how Afro minimalism is, we're centering that in our conversation for this book club. And the first quote we want to share is, "We're all consumers, people who purchase and acquire goods for personal use. Our choices impact not only our own lives, but also extend to the makers of these goods and their impact on the environment." So this quote makes me think of like going back to the thought of like genuine wellness versus aesthetic. With the TikTok wellness, I hear about it. I'm not on TikTok, but like everyone's talking about this one water bottle that everyone has. And like, and I have this one water bottle. It's simple. It has a straw on it, but I heard some of my coworkers talking like, oh, I want to get this new water bottle, when like how many of us have tons of water bottles already? Like, so I think that's like, for me, when I think about conscious consumerism and minimalism and how social media plays a role in getting us to want to be well. So like, oh, in order for me to drink water and like be healthy, I need the newest water bottle. Like, no, you just need to drink water in whatever vessel that is available to you.
Yeah. Also, when it comes to sustainability, that's what I'm saying. The greenwashing is when companies use like, oh, eco-friendly plastic, oh, BPA free, all these things. And like some of it is real, but also some of it is like they just add a little green leaf to it. And now it's supposed to be eco-friendly and conscious. But it's like if you already have a water bottle you've been reusing for 2 years, you don't need to now get another one that's made out of biodegradable material. It's like, okay, you're getting a new thing when you could just use what you already have. So that's what we also mean about conscious, right? Is that like you don't need to throw out everything in your house and get everything that's eco-friendly, sustainable, because that's not actually true sustainability, because you're still buying things.
Right. Like all the reusable jars that I have, they're not matching. They're like from different pasta jars, like my guava jam, and they don't look aesthetically cute, but it's sustainable. Another thing I wanted to bring up when talking about conscious um consumerism is, oh man, I'm losing my train of thought. It was just at the tip of my head. Oh, so the one thing I learned to stop saying is, "Oh, I got it for really cheap." After
Mhm.
watching the remake, we did it for this
Mhm.
for SOULstainable um uh was it screening. We watched a
Mhm.
documentary produced by Remake, and it talked about how um mass producing fast fashion impacts folks.
Mhm.
And that really changed the way I shopped, and I became more of a conscious consumer, meaning I now want to buy secondhand first. I now try to like really just use what I have, because fast fashion is one of the, most damaging things that we're doing to our planet. So I feel
Mhm.
like being a conscious consumer is definitely the first part of what sparked my minimalism, is like just stopping, like before I got rid of things, is just stop buying, and
Mhm.
also like stop thinking like, oh, because it's cheap that's good. Actually, that's bad. Like now I'm like, oh my
Mhm.
gosh, like if you're only paying like $10 for a pair of leggings, like that's actually pretty bad. And so now I'm so conscious of like the violence of like that just lighthearted comment, like as a shopper and
Mhm.
consumer. And now like I take that to heart. So it has changed, my language has then changed my behavior, because I
Mhm.
now aware of the impacts of having fast fashion.
Yeah, and that's what Christine talks about in her background of like why she became the Afro minimalist, because she was a lawyer making a lot of money, like
Mhm.
high income, high earning, highly educated. So had all the means to buy. And she also had like found joy in getting things on sale. So she mentions that that was how
Mhm.
she lived her life, and then she had to change due to
Mhm.
her life circumstance changing. She went through a divorce, had to move into a smaller home, so then began her journey into living with less. But she identified as that too. But another excerpt I wanted to share on page 35. So it's the little excerpt from Christine. So it says, as a lifestyle, minimalism means making a commitment to be a more conscious consumer. This
Mhm.
act of intention requires you to move responsibly as you decide what to keep and allow into your life. This includes being honest about your needs and what makes you happy, and educating yourself about the true cost of your purchases beyond
Mm.
their price tags. To be a conscious consumer, you must be aware of how your choices impact not only your lifestyle and finances, but the laborers producing these goods, as well as the environmental footprint. Our spending affects more than our wallets and what we acquire in our homes. Minimalism is an opportunity for us to be intentional in our consumption. So, exactly what you just mentioned. And then, hold on my throat.
Okay, so then Kyle shares, not
Um,
to foreshadow the book too much, but interesting that keeping up with the Joneses came up as a symptom of overconsumption, but yes, shows up in wellness system. Yes, shows up everywhere.
yeah, so we
Um,
talk about laborers, like Alyssa, you're mentioning. So, garment workers are majority women of color,
mhm.
so Black and brown women. And so, yeah, when you're talking about earlier about your impact, yeah, so it's directly affecting women of color in LA. Like,
Literally here.
it's not only overseas, like, not saying, not to minimize the atrocities that happen with fast fashion abroad, but it literally happens in our cities here. And so garment workers are paid terribly, are treated very terribly. Um, and so if you go to our previous post, we had shared some resources back in 2021 when we did the screening for Remake. So yeah, there's a lot of resources out there to learn, and there's websites that you can learn about the brands that you shop and all of that stuff that we can share at another time. Um, but yeah, so we're not saying this to like be like, oh, now you can't shop ever, because again, we're being holistic, and practical, right? You also have to meet yourself where you're at. Like,
Mm-hmm.
but that's why also it's like, sometimes to do a clothing swap with your friends, to, borrow an outfit from a friend instead of buying new, going to a local thrift store, things like that, repairing what you already have, or repurposing, using that material to make a different thing. There's different things you can do to be soul sustainable without actually purchasing things.
Exactly. And then a big part too, like what I appreciate about the beginning of this book is like understanding our why. Like, okay, so we want to become conscious consumers, but then understanding, I like how we also take a step back and we connect to our childhood. Like, how, where did these habits, where were they learned? And so the quote we want to share is, what we watched, we're told, and learned from our caregivers and community often have a profound impact on our relationship with money and how we spend it. So this is a discussion. We're
Mm-hmm.
opening it up to y'all. Like, let's take this moment to like reflect, like what we were first told about money and spending. What did we learn from our caregivers about money and how to spend it? That's what I appreciate about like this book. And for me, it's like um when I learned about from my caregivers, like we had a I whenever I wanted something, like I would just ask, and then if it if our parents could give it to us, we would have it. So I never really had an idea of like budget. I just like, if you work hard, you can get something. So like I was rewarded, like, okay, you get good grades, you can get those shoes, you can get these things. So I feel like I developed this thing of like, oh, if you work hard, reward yourself with something. So I feel like that's where like some of my behaviors of like, oh wow, like I relate to Christine when she was like, I'm working really hard, I'm gonna like treat myself. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
that is a behavior that came to me like in an innocent way. Like it wasn't like our parents were like, making us like, it was just so innocent. But what it bred for me was like hard work equals treat yourself in a way that is not necessarily like, in a way that sometimes can lead to overconsumption.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So on page 44, she has like 5 questions to kind of think about this. I'll read them out loud. So folks, if you don't have the book with you, you can like reflect as we're sharing. Um, it just says, ask yourself, what did I learn about spending and saving as a child? Number 1, was money, spending, and saving talked about openly in your home? If so, was the discussion healthy or a source of contention? Number 2, did you receive an allowance? If so, did you have to earn it or was it given freely? Number 3, how did your family celebrate milestones and key achievements? Were you rewarded with
Mm.
money, gifts, or non tangible affirmations? Number 4, what did your family do for fun? Which experiences were considered regular activities and which were considered a treat? And number 5, can you identify unmet needs and desires from your childhood? If so, how have they shown up in adulthood? And in what ways do you find yourself seeking to resolve them? So yeah, you have started like sharing your experiences on that. And yeah, I feel like, yeah, we got an allowance growing up. It was earned by good grades. But again, that just kind of reiterates that, oh, if you do a thing, then you should have, you will get rewarded with money or a thing, because sometimes they would take us shopping or something.
Mm-hmm.
And that also is typical in our house. It's like for a birthday or to celebrate an achievement. Like question 3 is asking, like it was usually a thing, either a gift or, oh, we're gonna take you shopping or something. um and so yeah, it was always like that was the reward, and there wasn't typically like a budget talked about. um yeah, it was, they never talked about money or or how they spent money to us as
And
children growing up.
yeah, and I think like this is kind of like jumping not a little bit of ahead, but like I feel like for us, like what we did as a family, we went to the movies. So
Hmm.
like the activities that we grew up doing together as a family usually involved spending money, but it
Hmm.
was an experience. So I also experience, like we definitely experienced that too. But when it comes to like grades and stuff, it was like things. And then we like to go shopping with our mother, but our mother also liked to thrift. So it's like, it was similar to Christine's too. It's like, yeah, we got deals, but it was definitely having, I really resonated with that. It made me, I never really even thought about, like, until this book, like how those childhood habits of shopping, like asking y'all, like, what was your first memory of shopping? Like, what was the first thing? Do you remember the first thing that you were able to buy with your own money? Do you remember the first thing you were able to buy as a reward? That's something that like made me like start to think. And I remember Tony, like at JC, like it was at Macy's, I bought my first baby fat purse on like Black Friday and with my own money. And it was, and the reason why I wanted the baby fat purse is because it was a brand. Like, I didn't even really care for a baby fat. And it was like black and lime green. I don't even like black and lime green, but I wanted that baby fat purse so bad because it was baby fat. And once I had it, I was like, I got my baby fat purse. It was like a little, it was a tiny one too. It was, so like, that was like my like first like memory of like wanting something that was not what I really, really wanted, but like I wanted it to like, but that's like kind of jumping ahead, but I wanted to like share that like that's a childhood memory of me. One of the things I remember buying with my own money.
Yeah, I can't really remember what exactly I bought. I do remember like growing up, sometimes mom would take me shopping, but there would be kind of like, I remember going to Limited too. I love Limited too, but she'd be like, okay, you need to buy, you like, you can only have like one or two outfits. Like I couldn't just do a shopping spree at that store because it was like expensive, right? But I do also have a memory of like, we did dance our whole lives and we did multiple classes, multiple competitions, solos, all that stuff. And it wasn't until we're older that I feel like our parents more so resented that they had to pay that money. So we'll bring it up like, oh, we paid for
After
your
the
dance
fact.
classes. We did all these things. But as a younger person, they never were like, hey, we only have X amount of money. So you can either do 3 of these types of classes, this or that, like, or a choice. It never was like presented as like, there's a limited amount and you need to do this. So they more so had the I guess their mindset was, I guess, these are children we're going to provide no matter their cost. But then as an adult, then they kind of use it against us. And I'm just like, well, I didn't know. I was a child. I don't know how much a
Yeah.
class costs. I don't know how much competition costumes cost. Like, I'm a child. So it's like, it wasn't until adulthood that then it was more so like spoken about. So it wasn't necessarily like healthy as a young person being taught, like, okay, you can choose to take 3 classes. Which one do you want to choose? You know, it was more so, oh, take all 6, but then now 10 years later, then they're like,
Yes, no. And I think that goes into the next thing, Tony, about the pressures of culture expectations. Because like I definitely feel, wait, sorry. Yeah, the pressure, I didn't realize it was a banner. The pressure of cultural expectations, I felt like because our parents had the like had the means, like both military, like our mom coming from the Philippines, our dad coming from Texas, like they had this cultural thing that like we want to give our kids the things that we didn't have. So I think that's why the abundance came, because like they grew up with less. So then they didn't want to say no because of their roots. It wasn't, and it came from a good place. Like came from like they wanted to shower us with the love language of gifts and giving things because of their background. But then at the same time, we weren't able to have those budgeting conversations because of where they're coming from. But I mean, this is like all hindsight, y'all.
Yeah, so it's like now as an adult, I have the same mindset, like, oh, I just want to do all the things all the time. And then I'd be
It's
looking at
hard
my
to
own budget
choose.
like, ooh, dang, like I don't have it. But it's not, I like, for me personally, I was not taught that, like, oh, maybe you need to do less things monetarily wise, right? I
But
was more so raised in like, if you want it, you can get it and we'll
well,
figure it out.
I think we also learned like, well, if you're working really hard, I think because we were rewarded, like you work really hard, that's when we're not going to say no to you. You're going to get to do all the dance classes because your grades are good. So that conditioned me to be like, well, if I'm working really hard, then why would I deny myself? Why can't I get like 3 things off the menu when I go to Thai? Like I just, like
Yeah.
it's that little, y'all. I'm saying it because that's that small where it's hard for me to be like, well, maybe I'll get drunken noodles this time and then pad thai the next. I'm like, I can get both. So I feel like I have these little habits that it to maybe the naked eye is like, get what you want, but I think it was learned to be more come from an abundance if you are working hard.
Yeah, and I do feel like our mom wasn't necessarily into name brands as much. Nowadays, she kinda be, but, like, growing up, she wasn't really into name brands, she was more so bargain shopper and thrifter, but I feel like our extended family, like, on both our mom and dad's side, were definitely about name brands. Like, I remember growing up,
Mhm.
our cousins, our aunts always had, like, the newest, like, insert whatever was
Cars,
popular, like,
purses.
car or purse or whatever, but I remember still to this day, I'm not necessarily into the brand, like, I do like cute things. But yeah, I do remember growing up and being like, "Oh, they really always have, like, the newest, like, thing," and so sometimes they couldn't afford it, like, extended family, so then they would get the knockoff, like, Louis Vuitton purse or the knockoff thing, and it'd be interesting, so I was just like, "Oh, like, I don't actually care for that, like, logo or brand, so I don't necessarily need the knockoff," but that was interesting, so I feel like those types of things we grew up around of, like, people also wanting because like Kyle mentioned in the comment of like keeping up with the Joneses, I feel like our extended family definitely might not have always had the financial means, but also always wanted to look like they had that level
Right.
of thing. Especially as immigrant family, as
Mhm.
family that grew up more poor, things like that is like I feel like definitely was ingrained in our extended family of like you might not have it, but we gonna look like what we do.
And that goes into our next part of live for today because tomorrow ain't promised and conspicuous consumption. And so that is the act of purchasing luxury items and wearing or displaying them in an
Mhm,
attempt to enhance or give the appearance of prestige. That was definitely evident
mhm,
in our family, y'all. That's what Tony was just talking about,
mhm.
conspicuous consumption. So let us know in the chat, like, can you relate? Do you partake? Have you witnessed? Because for us, we definitely witnessed that growing up. I, like I also shared, the first thing I bought was that baby fat purse. So I
Mhm.
learned at an early age, like having that purse. So, and I had no idea what these things were. But as I'm
Yeah.
reading this book, I'm like, I was definitely impacted.
Mhm.
I was influenced.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember like just growing up seeing people with like either Abercrombie or Limited Too or these we had American Girl doll, right? Like all those things were a brand. And there I'm sure there was other things that didn't have that logo on it, was just the same quality. But growing up, you're like, oh, you want the brand because like everyone at school is talking about it. You're like, ooh, that's so cool. And yeah, like we didn't always have the means to get like multiple of those specific things. So sometimes it was like mom and dad would be like, okay, you can have like one of that. But I remember like, yeah, like I guess because of the people around me wanting a thing, like I never actually truly liked Abercrombie.
Yeah,
But because everyone's wearing it, I was like, it's that social pressure, right?
yeah,
Like, oh, everyone's wearing it, so I guess I should get a sweater or something. But this is actually ugly.
right. But what's interesting though, y'all, like Tony, I want to ask you, like, what's interesting is like I felt conspicuous consumption the most in middle school. And then like when I got to college, like I didn't really feel that as much. I definitely felt that with I think my spending switched from things to experiences. Like I
Hmm.
definitely ate out, I definitely went out, I definitely
Hmm.
went on trips, while like in my 20s. But like as far as like conspicuous consumption, I for me it was rooted in those like I want to fit in days. So let us know in the comments if you also experienced that, like that those middle school days, maybe a bit in high school where you felt like you wanted to have a certain type of shoe, jean, branded logo on your t-shirt. And yeah. If you paid for it yourself
Yeah.
or you got your parents to do it.
I feel like this wasn't exactly how it happened, but I know when I first got like my driver's license in high school, everyone kind of thinks about, oh, what's your first car gonna be? And I always wanted just like a white car. I didn't really have like a specific type of car, but I wanted a color where I still have yet to have a white car. But then mom and dad were like, oh, here, your cousin's leaving. And they have this car that we got for a good price, a black two-door Honda Civic. I love that car, but yeah, it wasn't necessarily what I thought was, I guess, prestige at the time, but it got me places and it was cute and reliable. But I do feel like that's a time, especially in formative years of like your first car. I feel like it's something that you want to be like luxury or like cute and like give status, especially when you're high school.
Mhm.
And then I think also that goes into adulthood. I know people who get like a promotion or something and want to get like a new car to show that like, oh, I like am at this new level, right?
Right.
So yeah, I feel like cars, especially, I've seen like more people kind of really be like, "Ooh, what kind of car are you driving?" But
Right.
we didn't grow up like that. Our parents are like,
No.
"Is it reliable? Does it get good gas? Like, can it work across country drive?" Like, so
Mhm.
I'm not necessarily a car person, but
Yeah.
I do feel like more people will like, what do you call it? Like lease a car or like sell their car back so they can get a new one. Yeah, I feel like that's common.
Mhm. And I think now, like you're talking about, like in high school, like wanting to have like a newer car. I think now with social media, like this whole, moving on to mindless consumption, I feel like this we're even more it's more predatory for us to want
Mhm.
something and not even know why. Well, it's like,
Mhm.
have you ever noticed like you're talking about something and all of a sudden it shows up on your phone? So like
Yes.
so the mindless is it really mindless or is it, so the quote we want to share is acknowledging your participation in mindless consumption will be an essential part of your journey to living with less. So that is why y'all through up to this point we've been kind of sharing some stories, having some narratives and discussion because this is a part of the process, acknowledging our participation in the past, acknowledging how presently we are impacted by, social media to have conspicuous consumption or even mindless consumption. So take some time to think about that and also acknowledge this is a part of the process. We got to like peel back the layers, y'all.
Yeah, and I think also with mindless consumption, I also think of like when we're in the grocery store and like I was just at Trader Joe's today and like I got all the stuff I needed in my list, but as I'm going to the checkout counter, they have all these candies, these gummies, these chocolates, these granola bars. And so I think that's also the mindless part when you're just like, oh, it's right here. Let me just get it when it's like, did you actually need those candies? So today I didn't actually, but usually I would. And so I feel like that's the part too, where it's like in your everyday, routines, where are you just adding another thing here or there that you don't necessarily realize is like excess, right? That you don't actually need it or you don't actually
Mhm.
intend to get it when you left the house.
And I think Christine mentioned this too about like the debit versus the credit card, right? Because I think for me, when I go grocery shopping and I tend to get those extra little items, it's because I'm not thinking about what's my grocery budget. I don't think about that. I think about what do I want to cook and what looks good. And I just go, whoop, and I look at it later like, oh, I spent a lot grocery shopping, but I didn't have to. So for me, that's my reflection. I'm like, mindless consumption happens for me easily at the grocery store. I love that you shared that because I think those are the things people think, I don't buy a lot of stuff. I'm like, we buy food.
Hmm. Yeah, it could be applied to any aspect of your life, or like whatever you're into, like whatever your interests are. Just think about what you're actually into. What do you do all the time that you might be buying or consuming things that you might not need to do? I think especially with social media, because now they have the ads that you look at two girls with makeup and all of a sudden now you get a Sephora ad, you get this other makeup ad, now you have like this skincare thing, and then it's on Instagram. You can even click shop now. So like they make it so it's more mindless than not because and then usually, now you can have your cards synced up to all these accounts, Apple Pay. So I think also having Apple Pay and these contactless payment methods also enhance mindless
Hmm.
consumption because you're literally not thinking versus when we have cash, right? You have to like pull it out be like, oh, I only got two $20 bills in my wallet. Maybe I don't want to purchase this thing. But when it's just tap and go, you're just like, okay, living life to the fullest.
Dangerous. Dangerous, y'all. Hmm.
So, and then Kyle shares in the chat. Oh, wait, he says this other one first. Since we don't have titles in the US like Lord and Lady, we show social status through consumption. Brand association is a way to do it, but social media trends drive it as well today. And then it's halfway about quality, but a big chunk of the conspicuous consumption aspect, as well as consumer identity, iPhone versus Android. That's true. I'm an Apple girl all day.
Oh,
I Mac, I got iPhone, I got my iPad, I got my Apple Watch, and that's a wrap for me.
that is true. See, when we have to reflect on how we're affected, it's right
That's
there.
true. Like
Proof in the
one
pudding.
growing in high school when I had a non-iPhone, I was like, I didn't care if I had my phone or not. It was not on me. I didn't care if it got taken away. I didn't care. Once I got an iPhone, I was like, oh, I like this. I was like, I want to make sure this is good. So that's true. Like the brand of iPhone and like the capabilities, but it really is the brand. I was just like, ooh, I want to make sure this is more taken care of than a little flip phone, whatever. Throw that away.
Hmm. And segueing into like, why is it hard to let go? It's that psychology of ownership, right? Like, because we don't
Hmm.
have these roles, these titles, like what we own has become an extension of ourselves. And so the psychology of ownership is believing that something belongs to us or is an extension of us, which Tony was just sharing. It causes us to develop a strong emotional attachment to our belongings, even things that we don't need, use, love, which is why we find it difficult to let them go.
That's a whole word right there.
And I mean, so that's a way for us to think like, okay, so why is it hard for us to let go of
Hmm.
wanting the iPhone, wanting these name brand things, wanting to have the newest water bottle or whatever? It's because we want to have this feeling of ownership and think about the history of this country. It's embedded in the psychology of us feeling a type of way.
Yeah, which goes into the next quote, which is it's one of those for the culture aspect. So you'll see in the hardcover, it has it like in a black color with like a trim
Hmm.
around it. So on page 80, she shares ownership is especially complicated matter for people of the African diaspora. Our desire to seek comfort in things heightened when we live in a society where we constantly feel unsafe and at risk, right? And she says that Black people and other marginalized groups must understand the powerful connection between the psychology of ownership and the false sense of security it often provides. So that part, I was just like, that part is where other minimalists don't even talk about, right? Because clearly they're not Black, but also they don't have the cultural context. So I appreciate about this book that she does have tidbits like this that kind of just remind us that why this journey can be challenging for us and us as a collective is that we're unlearning these psychology of ownership, this the legacy of white supremacy, Jim Crow, and all of this have embedded this in us because
Yeah.
we were on survival mode for so long. So I appreciate that she talks about how because we're always feeling unsafe and at risk and things, then we want to own a thing because the legacy of white supremacy and colonialism, we were denied that right? So to understand that context, I feel like helps us let go of some of that self critique and feeling down about ourselves when we start our journey to minimalism. Because if you haven't already, it is a challenging journey to really sit with
Hmm.
yourself. It's very humbling, but I appreciate this context to be like, there's a rhyme or reason why our community, it tends to be harder for us to let go of these things.
Exactly. And I also like this last part too. She says, if our resources are used to purchase things for comfort instead of building generational wealth, we run the risk of not only remaining victims of systematic oppression, but even worse, contributing to it.
Yeah. So I think that's why also when people, idolize Beyonce and Jay-Z, it's like they also capitalists and consumers.
Well, because when you idolize
So
those people, it makes you want to buy more so you can live a certain life versus like missing the mark of keeping money, like saving money, building generational wealth. So I really appreciate like these for the culture moments for me helps bring it's the message is just stronger. It's like almost like
mhm,
a steeper brew of this tea
mhm,
of minimalism. And I really, really appreciate it. And like,
mhm,
I also appreciate how later on the chapter she goes on to like attachment, like the reason why we have all the things. And the first quote we want to share is think of attachments as invisible bonds between us and our belongings. Our feelings are also bonded to these attachments. So, like, I feel that. Like, I really feel attached to these things, but what's helping me unlearn is these for the culture like moments. So I really appreciate her doing that, because just reading like, yeah, you shouldn't have these things, I'm like, yeah, but they're mine, I bought them, and it just stops there. And that's why I feel like I've always cycled back in my minimalist journey of like getting rid of things because of clutter, the aesthetic, but not understanding my why and my purpose of having a minimalist life. And for me, this for the culture like sections, which I really want y'all to get into, get this book. These are the parts that are really like hitting deep chords in me and making me want to, like, helping me to want to commit to this from a deeper lens than just like having a nice, clean, clear space.
I also appreciate that she talks about our feelings that are attached to it too, because I feel like in the normal, or not normal, the mainstream minimalist journey, they make it seem like you have no emotions with your items, that it's totally separate, and that if it doesn't bring you joy, if it doesn't go with your intention, then you just get rid of it, and you won't be affected. So I appreciate that she talks about how like it can affect you, and that's okay. That's why she says like we're not starting with letting go yet, because you need to understand. So when you get to that point, you will have the awareness to then either take a pause and be like, I need to take a break from this, or put it in a maybe pile, or actually let it go.
Yeah, and I also like how that's why she goes on to talking about our motivations. Like, we are motivated to have things that help us feel safe and secure, reflect our identity, and stimulate our senses. So we can't just like throw it all away because it's wrong and we shouldn't be living this way. She's like, no, like Tony said, like we need to surround ourselves with things that make us feel secure. So the answer is not get rid of all your stuff. That's not the answer. The answer is to make sure that we are creating a sacred space. We talk about that. We talk about building our sanctuary so that we can be more intentional. We can put our money to things that are going to sustain us beyond our years on this earth for future
Yeah.
generations.
So when we talk about motivations, then she shares there are 4 key motivators that cause us to have attachments to our belongings. So number 1 is affectance, which stems from our need to understand and predict aspects of our lives to reduce uncertainty. Number 2 is stimulation, which stems from our need to feel aroused and stimulated. So those two, affectance and stimulation, play minor roles when it comes to overconsumption. The remaining 2, self-identity and home, are the main causes, which we'll get into now. So again,
I
she talks
really
about
appreciate
she talks about 4 motivators, and yeah, they talk about your emotions, but also your identity, and then your physical space. So self-identity, so the things that represent who we are. And so self-identity is our need to define and express ourselves to others. We develop attachments to our belongings because we feel they're extensions of who we are, what we value, and what matters most to us. Um, and when I think of self-identity and like items that I have, I think of my earrings. Like my earrings are definitely how I express myself. And then I also acquire them like on my travels, or when I go to an interesting place. I especially like to get them in like locally made or artisan made stuff like that. Um, and that's what I like about Afrominimalism, because she's like, you don't need to get rid of those things because this is a part of, like, we'll get into in the later sessions, but she talks about why there's things that it's okay to have more of. But yeah, I think when I think of self-identity, I think of kind of like how I adorn myself physically, and how I dress have been definitely a way that I express myself.
I feel that. And the next one,
the fourth
you can
one
go
is
ahead.
home. So the things that represent comfort and security. So when home is our motivator, our dwellings and belongings stem from our need to feel anchored. Our attachments are rooted in our desires to feel comfortable, safe, and secure. Right? I like that she talked about how, like, our need to feel anchored. So again, we talk about a home. We grew up moving because we're a military family, so I think that is why I think probably also now we do like to hold on to things because we moved every 3 years and had to get rid of things. Only so many things can fit on the moving truck. So I do feel like that probably does show up in adulthood in certain ways with us, with keeping certain things or having attachments to things, right? And having that emotional attachment to it. And our desires to feel comfortable, safe, and secure. I also think of like my room as a sanctuary, like how she defines it. So I do have a lot of things like my plants. I have these different seat
Mhm.
cushions. I have my crystals. I have string lights. All these things to make it feel cozy and secure.
I identify with this. Like I have 8 pillows, and
She does.
typically,
That
like,
is not a lie. She has 8 pillows, like sleeping pillows, like not decorative, like actual pillows.
and people might think like, they'd be like, "Oh, that's too many." But like for me, like I like to feel like when I'm sleeping, I'm like inside of like cocooned womb. I love cuddling, so I like to surround myself on my pillows. I got one in the back, front, between the legs, head, hugging one. And that makes me feel secure. So I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna have a lot of pillows. And that's okay because that's how I get a good night's rest.
Yeah, so we'll get into in a different week about why it's okay because Christine will go into that. But yeah, we are kind of just sharing some anecdotes from our personal journeys. But Kyle shares here, I do think it's important to hold on to those aspects of personal identity through the things we own. But it's also interesting to think through the question, who are we without the brands we love? Right? Yeah, I think that is really important. Or who are we without just things, right? Without physical things, who are we, right? Without my earrings, without my space here, like who is Tony? And I feel like in my journey, I have done a lot of like self reflection, healing, and things like that to know that. But I do feel like a lot of folks are still on that part of their journey of who they are. And it changes throughout life. Like I'm sure it'll
Hmm.
change in different seasons that I'm in. Um, but yeah, these are great questions to think about. That's what I'm saying. Afro minimalism, this approach is very like self-reflective, very internal. A lot of self-awareness is needed to be on this journey.
And as we're talking about like the different things that we are going to get into on our journey, we want to also talk a little bit more about the psychology of ownership and consumerism. And the psychology of ownership is an integral part of the equation for recognizing why you have more than you need, as well as why it's hard to let go. I really appreciate how Christine like really honed this in at the end because
Hmm.
I think I've always been like I've always felt like when it comes to minimalism, I've been preached to and a lot of anecdote about like people's personal reasons of why. But I really appreciate that she has personal, but also these definitions and to help ground us to develop our why instead of like resonating with someone else's story, like so we can create our own
Hmm.
stories so that we are anchored in our own stories. We're anchored in our own
Hmm.
whys. And so I really
Yeah.
appreciate that too. Like it's a part of the equation.
Hmm. So also with the psychology of ownership, on page 89, she has these questions about like what to remember. And she talks about number two, the mere act of touching an item triggers feelings of partial ownership, which can quickly lead to a desire to have full ownership, which also triggers fear of loss. And I think this all of that also is just so internal that like I feel like we never talk about that. It's like when you go to a store and you're like touching the thing, or even when you're on Instagram and you put in your cart or shopping online, you put in your cart, you feel like you already got the thing. So then it's just easier for you to just purchase it and take it home with you.
Well,
Um, yeah, so I appreciate that. And then also when she talks about then the fear of loss, right? Like, so now I have this thing, I own it, I have this attachment to it. Then now what happens if it's not here, right? Like when people, due to like natural disasters, lose their whole home and stuff, like that is very tragic. But also like part of it's because sentimental, right? Like you could have photo albums, you can
mhm.
have keepsakes, you can have heirlooms. But I think a lot of stuff in many of our homes are just things. So like if we did lose it, many things we can replace, not all, but there are many things that are replaceable. So I think that's what Afro minimalism comes to too. It's just like, okay, so like why do we have these things in our house? Like what is the actual like importance and the intention so we can know why it's here. So we don't just like keep junking up our houses.
Yeah. And I also appreciate her saying this, because she was saying like the what is it called? The people who are selling it to us, they understand the psychology of ownership, that which is why they're having you try this, test this, you know, money back guarantee. Do we ever, whenever you have a money back guarantee, you ever always return it? I mean, with Amazon, it makes it easier, but I'm just saying, like, they just want to put it in your hands, because they know that once you have it, you're less likely to return it, actually. So
Yeah,
I
she
feel
talks
like,
about
so
she talks
I
about like
appreciate,
test driving a car. So
yeah,
it was like the car. She was like, because when you're in it, then you already can visualize your life with this car here. And then think of like when you go to a makeup place like Sephora, and then they do your makeup, and
yep.
then most of the time you end up buying the thing they put on your face.
Yeah, so for me, it's like I appreciate this conversation in the book, the part of the beginning of the guide, so that we understand when it is working on us. So we know, like, okay, I understand what's happening here, and we can choose not to participate. Like, that's for me. I'm like, okay, she's giving us like these tools and understanding of like how these are played onto us, and that's why it works. So in order for us to combat it, we have to know like the tools they're going to be using.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's why it's like psychology of ownership, because she says marketing people
Yes,
and
marketing.
brand people study this. She was like, she was gonna go to the psychological association to look at research, and she was like, actually, brands research this. So yeah, like when you think of capitalism and marketing, they literally conduct studies and interviews and research to make sure that they're doing things to get us to buy stuff, right? So I think that's also empowering to know that we also have a choice on this journey to say no, right? So maybe we're not going to test drive a vehicle. Maybe we're not going to try on the outfit. Maybe we're not going to have them test the makeup on us, because we're like, actually, I'm not sure if I want this. Like, maybe do your research beforehand. So when you go there, you know the exact thing you're going to buy, versus then being, manipulated essentially to get more than
Right.
you actually need.
I think it's all coming back to like being conscious consumer. Like, part of being a conscious consumer is not only just understanding the impact that it has on other people, but the impact that consumerism has on us, and how it's constantly with our phones being, and when we go to a store, how it's being played upon us. And so, what was I gonna say? With that being said, we want to root back to like minimalism. Like, why minimalism? What are we working to attain here? And minimalism is the gateway to living an authentic and intentional and purpose driven life. And like for me, like that's what I want. Like that's what I'm looking forward to with going through this book. I really want to dive deeper into having that authentic life. I feel like I am there with other aspects, but when it comes to things, y'all, I could do another round of this.
Yeah, I think all of us, we can do a
Mhm.
refresh, reset. So that's what we'll talk about next week when we meet, is kind of some activities on how we're going to start this journey together, or continue this journey, right? Today is the
Mhm.
start. We're talking about the principles, what our intention is, and then we'll just get deeper as the weeks go. So yeah, minimalism is so broad and so more expansive. Or Afro minimalism is a lot more expansive than what we might have been taught with mainstream things about sustainability, about minimalism.
Mhm.
So, we're here to have a discussion. So, we did want to close out by asking you all, how do you feel after reading part one, the principles? If you stayed the whole time, if you're watching the replay, you can still comment below and let us know. For me, after the first part, I feel like it was just a good reminder of why this happens, and to give myself grace that it's okay, that it's a practice. It's okay that, even though I've been on this journey for a while, that, things are still cluttered, or there's still a little too much of things, to just reset, and to recommit, like she said, to this journey. And I really appreciate the for the culture aspect. So again, if you don't already have the book, please do purchase it. The Afro Minimalist Guide to Living with Less. There's also an audiobook, because there's so much more context and depth that we did not even get into. yeah, my takeaway was just like there was so much refresher that I really appreciated.
Yes, after reading the principles, for me, it goes back to like having another pathway towards liberation. Like I think that's been the theme of all the books that we're reading, whether we're resting or practicing love. I think for me, it's like I'm feeling expansive, and I'm feeling um, ready to add another tool to my journey towards liberation, to our collective journey towards liberation. I'm excited to explore and dive into our Afro minimalist journey as a collective and see where it takes us for our community, how we can journey to living with less so that we can have more time and to be intentional with each other and all that. So I'm feeling um, pretty hopeful that this time around I'll be able to have some long, like, what is it? What's the call? Like sustaining, like, because we're talking about sustainability. I'm feeling like with the way that this book is guiding me in my personal reflection, that I'm going to have sustained change. I'm really looking forward to
Mhm.
sustained change in my practice of minimalism through the Afrocentric lens.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I'm feeling energized as well, like the rereading the book. And then Kyle shares feeling reflective about how we consume and what that means to us. So yeah, thank you
Mhm.
all for sharing with us. It's been great hanging out with y'all. Of course, subscribe to our YouTube at Soul Tree Sisters to get alerted when we go live. And check out our website, soultreesisters.com/book club. You can catch the replays on our YouTube, also our Facebook page. And of course, follow us at Soul Tree Sisters on all platforms to be in the know what we're up to. So we'll be here, same time, same place, to discuss part 2 of the book next week. And then we'll also be having a different types of Earth Month activities and practices throughout the month. So definitely check us out online to be in the know of everything that we're doing this month. And so we'll see you all next week.
All
Bye.
right. Bye.